What's up, everybody? It is Izzy back here again with episode 122 of the Q&A. Let's get to it with the first question of the day. Why am I much stronger doing one-arm rows than when doing rows with both arms? This is usually because when you are rowing with one arm, you can get some degree of torso rotation going on, and that rotation of the torso you can use to create momentum. Starting to regress really hard on Smith incline bench. All my other presses have progressed just fine. What to do? So, yeah, you might just need to rotate this exercise out. It could just be stale. However, the one thing that bothers me about what you said here is that one exercise is regressing really hard, which to me suggests that there is a fatigue issue. Either you're doing too many sets for that exercise, or something else earlier in your training microcycle is having an interference effect on your recovery for Smith incline. Can you please recommend some resources to learn more about powerlifting? So, here's the thing. I haven't personally followed powerlifting very closely in almost 5 years now. However, a timeless recommendation that I can always make is to go check out content by Mike Teixeira. He's been a thought leader in the powerlifting world since I started powerlifting, and he still is, like almost 15 years later. So to check out Mike Teixeira. If you're more of a beginner to powerlifting stuff, then you can check out my old website and my old YouTube, which is Powerlifting to Win. It's got a lot of great information for beginner powerlifters. Most overrated and underrated accessories for SBD. Man, if I'm not careful, I could spend the rest of the Q&A answering this. Okay, squat. Most overrated. Front squats. I know it's going to be controversial, but in my experience, the vast majority of people just cannot do front squats. They cannot get good technique on front squats. They don't have the right body segments, or they just don't have the mobility. And front squats end up being an exercise in frustration because their upper back fails way before their legs in the vast majority of cases. Underrated, hack squats. A lot of powerlifters tend to have anti-machine biases, and a lot of raw powerlifters tend to have very underdeveloped quads because they spam low bar squats. And frankly, in my experience, low bar squats are a primary adductor exercise, and the adductors get worked maximally, not the quads, in a lot of people, depending on their leverages. So doing a machine that maximally trains the quads in a squat pattern is going to have more carryover than other machines like a leg extension or leg press. For deadlift, on underrated, I'm going to go with good mornings. Most people, once they get into the 600 for reps on deadlifts, cannot deadlift every week anymore, conventional that is. They have to start doing it every 10 days, sometimes every 14 days. And people that get into like the 700s and 800s, sometimes they only deadlift once every third week. Good mornings are a heavy hinge that allows you to do hinges more often. For overrated, I will go with supra-maximal block pulls and rack pulls. Meaning rack pulls and block pulls from heights where you're stronger than you are off of the ground, so they're not addressing a weak point. I think that they just rack up tons of fatigue, and you could be getting more carryover just by pulling from the floor in most cases. For bench press, underrated, I will say extended range of motion bench pressing with competition technique using cambered bars. For overrated, I'll go with tempo benching. I'm not talking about long pauses. I'm talking about concentric and eccentric tempos that are long for bench press technique. I don't like them. What is something you wish people would just get with regards to lifting? I think for me, it's contextualizing optimality. And what do I mean by that? Just because something is optimal, it doesn't necessarily tell you how important it is. So for example, let's say that across a lifetime, you could gain half an ounce more of lifetime muscle mass by eating 500 grams of protein a day versus eating 250 grams of protein a day. Now, I'm not saying this is actually true, but let's just say it was. That means anytime that somebody would see me having a diet of 250 grams of protein, they would call me out for having a diet that's not optimal, right? The problem with that is it doesn't really matter. That's a half an ounce of muscle across your lifetime. That's like 10 to 15 grams, people. You're not even going to notice that. Whereas you are going to notice a huge difference to your appetite, to your digestion, and to your wallet eating literally double the amount of protein. In fact, it might even prevent you from being able to eat enough food to mass effectively. It might prevent you from eating enough carbs to have energy while you're dieting. And ultimately, it just ends up not being that important. Here's how I see this playing out on social media a lot recently. You will have less experienced lifters, smaller lifters, calling out much bigger lifters for the things that they are doing, which are admittedly suboptimal. Like, let's say their eccentric tempo is a little bit too fast. They're not pausing an exercise that would benefit from a pause. They're not completely locking out their reps. Here's the issue. The difference in gains from having a 2-second eccentric and a 1-second eccentric does not really matter. And the proof of that is all the pros who have 1-second eccentrics, which there is a lot of them on a lot of exercises. On the other hand, these very same people who are getting hyper-focused on technique nuances are doing things like not tracking their micronutrients, not getting 8 hours of sleep every night, not training with aggression and passion. The classic example that Stan Efferding used, and the saying he has was, there are people who are stepping over quarters to pick up pennies. For example, somebody that wakes up at 4 a.m. to do fasted cardio, but it makes it so they only get 5 hours of sleep. You would have been better off just sleeping. And this is what I'm trying to get people to understand when it comes to the nitty-gritty nuances of training, which is probably the least important factor in bodybuilding. You have people who have suboptimal nutrition and recovery practices in terms of sleep, in terms of micros, in terms of even their macros, in terms of the quality of the food that they eat, in terms of lifestyle, high-stress lifestyle, staying up late playing video games, staying up late watching Netflix. And you're criticizing training variables that barely make a difference. It just makes no sense. So to wrap this question up, always try to keep in mind how important something is, not just keeping in mind what is the best thing. Otherwise, what's going to happen is that you're going to keep snickering at the quote-unquote bench bro, gym bro, who smashes all your PRs, but, does it because he's got way better genetics and he's succeeding in spite of his training. When the reality of the situation is, if you looked at the totality of his process versus the totality of your process, he's actually whooping your ass on effort and outside the gym variables, and you are winning on these technical details of programming and training that barely matter in the grand scheme of things compared to effort and recovery. Okay? So with that said, let's do the ads real quick. If you enjoy the Q&A, please like the Q&A when it comes out on YouTube. If you'd like to work with me for coaching or check out any of my ebooks, look at the links in my profile on Instagram or the links in the description box on YouTube. Have a good one, everyone. Peace.